Yo, what's up? I know it's been a minute, but I'm back. And the NBA playoffs are coming to its culmination. Let's talk about it. Let's dive in on another episode of the Back to the Game Sportscast. Starts right now. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Samuel Maria. Welcome back to another episode of the Back to the Game Sportscast. Before we get started, as always, want to invite anybody who's watching this to go ahead and like, subscribe, and share. As after you watch the episode, if you like what was said, disagree, agree, feel one opinion might have a better take, just leave a comment below. I want to see what you got to say. So with that being said, let's get right back into it. Let's go where we left off, which was around the mid-second round when my Celtics were getting plummeted by the overachieving Knicks. I don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it. A lot of things started happening for me. Got a little busy creatively, some jobs, as well as some personal things. So I decided that I would just let the playoffs play out and come back and give a more cohesive, bigger picture take than that quick turnaround thing that what you see out of most podcasts. I get that way of doing this, and I'll go into streaks of doing that, but I'm more of a big picture guy. I like to let things unfold and that just kind of give not just like my guesses but I really want to just give my perspective on what's actually happening, and hopefully that is what resonates with people and the things that come out from that. So I think that was what took place in the last couple of weeks. We saw the playoffs really rev up, at the same time kind of die down as the cream of the crop really rose to the top. And we could start out west with Oklahoma City. I mean, what more can you say about these guys? 68 wins, MVP, a roster that isn't just talented and young, but they're together. They play, you could tell these guys get along really, really well. And they were the best team all year, and it showed. The biggest moment in that series against Minnesota was when the Timberwolves blitzed them and beat them by 40 plus points. The next game, they came back and beat the Wolves in a very tight, contested game, and they were clutch and they were confident. And that, I think, really was when everyone who's watching the Thunder wondering what kind of team they were dealing with, that's when everyone knew. Everyone was like, you know what? This Thunder team is made of the right stuff. So that, they adjusted, they responded, and then they came back home and blew out the Wolves. I mean, returned the favor. You know what I mean? So, and listen, if you heard me earlier this year in one of my episodes, not to toot my own horn, it was all before all of the MVP talk, I called SGA that dude. I had an episode where I listed the top 10 faces of the NBA, because there was a lot of conversation around who was going to be the face of the NBA. And coming in number one, mid-year, when this podcast first started, you can go back and check the episodes. I had SGA at number one, and he's shown me right. Not only did he go on to win the MVP, but he has all of the tools on and off the court to really solidify and claim that spot of being the face of the NBA. I mean, it's not just the game, but it's the balance that he brings. He's a mid-range assassin like MJ and Kobe. He's got that killer instinct. Despite being on an extremely talented team, when it comes down to it, his team looks to him to close the deal. That's a huge thing for me as far as being the face of the league and the face of a franchise. But I also think he's extremely, charismatic. He's humble, and he has a very strong but quiet leadership. He's not too loud. He's not too flashy. But when the lights get bright, he shines, and he's there. He's got all together. He's a family man. I think it's just the perfect fit He's not American, but he's American-like. You know, he's got a lot of swag. He's got a lot of fashion. All the great faces of the NBA brought that to the table. But most of all, he's got the game and he's got the courage to be the best player when the best player is needed most. I think that is the number one quality. He showed a level of maturity and growth this year that extended beyond the court, and that's why the Thunder, that's the main reason the Thunder are in the finals and on the precipice of another championship. So now kind of switching over to the East, the Eastern Conference Finals, which saw not my Pacers, but the Pacers play the Knicks after beating my Celtics. I think overall the East was a lot more interesting because while the West generally had more talented teams, they seemed to me to be more style than substance. And, you know, cool highlight reels with guys like Ant and Luka, LeBron, Steph, you know, the young bucks from the Houston Rockets. But when it came down to it, when it came down to who's really built for championship, the West really thinned out pretty fast, and the Oklahoma City Thunder really rose to the top. The East was different. The East, you had a lot of identity in the East. You had Boston, you had Cleveland, you had the Knicks, you had Indiana. Teams who were who they were for most of the year. They were teams with real culture, real depth, real identity, and a style of play that you felt could win them a championship under the right circumstances. So to me, the East had much more storylines, had much more cultural impact as far as this year's playoffs, and that was really cool to see. And what can you say, man? Congratulations to the Indiana Pacers. I mean, they're, along with the Celtics, the prototype of the modern day basketball team. If you can make it happen, which is a combination of high skill and depth. I mean, the difference is that they weren't just chucking threes like the Celtics tried to do. So if you ask me, not only do they go deep like the Celtics, but they play fast and they played inside and out. The Celtics checked off two of those boxes, but they will only play on the outside. You know, even down to their bench. It's like CJ McCollum was like a version of Peyton Pritchard, but he lived inside the paint, you know, trying to make things happen. So I thought that Rick Carlisle did a masterful job in coaching this team and not letting them kind of be limited in their style of play, but also have some foundation in the roots of basketball. And I think that that's what put them in this position. Who knows if they would have beat the Celtics? They probably would have beat the Celtics given the Tatum injury, but they were better than a lot of people realize, and they are not a fluke. They're definitely a really, really great team. And, you know, the Knicks, you got to give them credit. It's pure grit, but they overachieved. I mean, and I mean that really in the best way. You got to be real. This is one of those rare occasions in the NBA and in any sort of playoff format that goes 7 games where usually the better team wins. When it came down to the Knicks and the Celtics, the better team did not win that series. I don't care how much it appeared that the Knicks were the better team. They had more grit, they wanted it more, and Boston's style of play was exposed. But they were not the better team. They were simply outcoached and outgritted. And by giving away those first 2 games in that series, the Celtics set themselves back to not be able to come back and combat that loss of Tatum. They still had enough without Tatum to beat this Knicks team, but the 0-2 hole they put themselves in, given the momentum behind the Knicks, the hunger of the fan base, and the way Jalen Brunson was playing, it was just not going to happen. And so this was one of those rare occasions where the lesser team won the 7-game series, but in the end, something was going to come due for the Knicks. It just was not going to happen for them in the Eastern Conference Finals. Indiana was a version of the Celtics, maybe not as talented, but they were better coached and they had a more sustainable style of play. And honestly, I kept watching Indiana and thinking, this is what Boston should have been. And I know that the coaching had had to have been thinking that. And this is where I think Mazzulla really needs to improve. I think that he, in many ways, his stubbornness makes him special, but he needs to know when to give that up. I think that's what haunted Bill Belichick towards the end of his career, and towards the middle of his career when the Super Bowls were coming in for the Patriots. It was his ability to collaborate and adjust, and the Patriots were known to be the best adjusting week-to-week team in the NFL for many years. And I think the Celtics got caught in kind of believing their own hype. Sorry to make this about the Celtics, but that was a huge injury, and it's been weeks since we've been on this podcast, and that was a major storyline of the playoffs. But I couldn't help but watching Indiana and being like, man, had the Celtics played a little more that style, they probably would be in a better position, which kind of brings up the point of, and I'll talk about Haliburton in a second here, but should they consider bringing in a traditional point guard? Because what they had was a point guard by committee who was the best to run the offense or against whatever opponent they were against. But then from Drew Holiday to Brown to Tatum to Derek White to Pritchard, each one of those guys became extremely reliant on the three-point shot and not on creating offense for others and being a true point guard like Haliburton, who I'll get into in a second. But to kind of wrap up that thought, the Tatum injury, man, devastating for all of us Celtics fans. It was really rough. I actually watched it across the street from Madison Square Garden, and I was surrounded by Knicks fans, and it was absolutely brutal. And I'm praying for Tatum and a speedy recovery. So much great medicine and technology now, so I know that he'll get back out there. But here's the thing, and I've said this before about Tatum, he's got all the talent in the world and all of the skill, but what makes me wonder who he will be when he comes back is I question his fire. I often say I wish I could take Jaylen Brown's mentality and put it into Tatum's skill set. They would make the best player in the NBA, and if you watch Tatum play those last few games and this year, his game has really shifted to what began as a multi-dimensional inside-out game. It's really shifted to a very heavy three-point shooter. And so I wonder who he'll be athletically when he comes back, and if he's going to be limiting himself to just becoming a three-point shooter, or will he be get back to being the dynamic scorer, all-around scorer, three-level scorer that I think he came into the league kind of showing that he could be. So I really wish that Tatum could take that next step to evolve that kind of Brunson, Kobe, MJ style, footwork, mid-range, getting through the free throw line and having a real killer mentality. But I think that takes a certain stoic, unshakable demeanor. And I'm just not sure that Tatum fully possesses that or has fully embraced that part of himself, gone to that dark side. So we'll see who he is when he comes out of this, both physically and mentally, but we're praying for him. Celtics Nation is praying for him. And, the Celtics need him. The league needs him. The league is better when the Celtics are good. So it's going to be a tough road, but we're praying for you, Jason. Just want to give my thoughts on that. Now, kind of want to shift over back to the Eastern Conference playoffs because I want to talk about Haliburton and more about Indiana, who was about to face off against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Tyrese Haliburton really arrived in these playoffs. He showed just how good he was at controlling the game, how unselfish he is. He's got good length, so he's not really a defensive liability. And I'd like to see his jumper be more consistent, but his impact on the game goes beyond the box score. That game that he had, it's like one of those games that when I couldn't even tell that he scored 32 points. That's how much he was impacting the game in other ways. And then that 0 turnover and 4 steals, I think statistically it's one of the greatest games in NBA history, and he will always have that. And you could tell his confidence level is extremely high. So for me, the Pacers weren't better than the Knicks because they were flashier. It was because they understood what it takes to win, which is with depth, coaching, and team basketball. And kind of now the final part of this, I want to talk about the finals coming up. OKC versus Indiana. They're kind of mirror images of each other. OKC maybe with a little more talented, but they're both young. They both got a bunch of shooting. They both got really great point guard play. They both got great depth, and they got great offensive pace. And I think we know Oklahoma's great defensively, but I think Indy is underrated defensively. So for people who are talking about this is not a sexy matchup, the market's wrong. This is a great matchup. This is going to be awesome basketball to watch if you're a fan. And I think you'll see this is the game, the modern game at its highest level. Not just a bunch of guys shooting threes, but that being part of the game, a high level part of the game, but so much more. You know, OKC, deeper, more talented. Indiana, more battle tested, no fear, team first, and they have a real toughness, and they've beaten some dog teams, some really great teams. So I think most people are going to say on paper OKC should win in 4 to 5, but this is the finals, and the lights are brighter, the pressure is different, and I think young teams can freeze. Just ask the 22 Celtics about that, and I think that OKC has a little bit of that. They got a lot of young guys who've never been on the stage. Now, they're benefited by the fact that they're so close. They play for a small market, and you can tell that they share a real strong bond. And also, they're not necessarily facing what the Celtics in 22 faced when they faced the Warriors, which was a championship pedigree, battle-tested team. They're playing another team who's kind of in a similar position as them, and they're the more talented version. So I think Indiana mirrors a lot of what OKC does: the depth, the ball movement, the pace, and they don't shrink in the clutch. And they've won in Milwaukee, they've won in Cleveland, and they won in New York, which is really great test going in. So I think this will be a much more interesting battle than people give it credit for. I think they will give OKC better games than anybody in the West outside of the Nuggets did. And I think people think Indiana will only steal a game. I think they could steal 2. And I could see this going 6. Especially if the road players for Indiana show up. Not the road players, the bench as well as the role players. If they show up on the road, obviously that's the case for any game. But I think particularly for Indiana going into game 1 and 2, they've become so adept at stealing one of those games on a team that heavily favors them that I know if Neesmith and Nembhard, I think I'm saying his name right, and Turner can go ahead and support Siakam and Haliburton, this is going to be a great series with great pace, great basketball, and I think the Indiana Pacers can steal 2 games. But eventually, OKC is going to be too much. And the biggest reason, I've talked about them already, and why I'm still riding with OKC is because of one man, and that's SGA. He is the difference. And this OK team reminds me so much of the Celtics teams of the last 7 or 6 years with so much talent and so much depth, but couldn't close the deal because they didn't have a guy like SGA. He's not going to shrink. He's not going to defer. He's going to take the big shot. And he's going to live in the mid-range when it matters. You know, SGA, he's got that Kobe. He's got that, you know what? I'm going to put this away. And I still think Jokic might be the best all-around player in the league. But this year, SGA was the best player. MVP, best team, best chemistry, best star. So my pick for these finals is OKC in 6. But it's going to be tougher than people think. People think 4 or 5. I think Indiana's going to fight. And they got enough shot making and enough playmaking and enough creativity that this won't be a cakewalk for the Thunder. I think the Thunder played a lot of talent in the West, but not as many great teams. So I think if Indy's role players show up, it might be closer than people think. either way, I think this is a great matchup for hoops. The only better matchup I could have asked for was the Celtics and the Thunder, not just because I'm a Celtics fan, but because there's a similar dynamic as far as the talent and styles that would be meeting up in these finals, and seeing Brown and Tatum wouldn't have been there, but go up against SGA, that would have been great. But the Pacers bring a version of that, less star power, but a version of that style of basketball, that high level, high IQ, well coached, but inside and out. And I'm super excited to see it. This should be high scoring all around. I want to kind of end this episode because right before I watched this, I did watch Jason Timpf break down what happened to the Knicks. And I thought that he brought up a really great point, and I kind of want to just reiterate this. And for anyone looking for other great sports podcasts, that's one of my favorites because I think he does a really great job at not being partial and doing his best objective version of how he looks at the game and what he thinks. And that's why I think he's having a lot of success. I kind of strive to be, to do something similar. I think I'm a little more, artistic with my take. He's very analytical, but I do respect a lot of what he does. And what I loved about what he said, and I want to kind of end the episode on this because the Knicks storyline was such a big storyline. Knicks fans, they celebrated, had a mini parade after the second round win. A lot of people are talking about what the Knicks need to do to get better for next year. But what I love that Jason pointed out was it doesn't matter who you bring in if you're not making the adjustments in how you practice, what your philosophy is, and how you coach the game. It's very clear that the Knicks need to sit down Tibbs. They don't need to fire him. Tibbs is a really great coach. He was a defensive coach on that championship 2008 Celtics team and has led a lot of teams to a lot of success. But there's clearly need to be a conversation from management with Tibbs that he needs to rely more on his team to adjust to the modern game of allowing your bench to develop and using them throughout the season. The NBA is headed towards 9-10 guys playing in the playoffs. It used to be you could only trust 6 or 7, but now guys are being developed throughout the season because of load management, because guys take nights off, and because the league is just so deep. You have to develop your bench so that they're ready for the playoffs. The Knicks found some nice things, but they hadn't been in the habit of bringing in guys off the bench enough for that to work in a 7-game series in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I thought Jason pointed out a great point in that. And then on top of that, the habits that you practice defensively, the philosophy that you practice defensively. It doesn't matter who you bring in, the Knicks will find themselves in this position if they continue to practice the same habits, philosophy, and coaching style of running down your stars. So I thought that was a really great point. And if you're a Knicks fan, you're watching this, I'm sure you agree with that. I think that will allow the Knicks to go to the next level. The East is going to be wide open because Celtics, they're just not going to be at the top. A lot of things are coming. A lot of changes are coming. And maybe I'll do another episode on the free agency that's about to happen in the NBA. But for now, that's all I got for you guys. Thanks for tapping in. I know I've been gone a minute. I'm a little rusty, but I got right back into it. I'm excited about the NBA Finals starting tomorrow. As always, if you like this episode of the Back to Game Sportscast, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. And leave your boy a comment. I'm your boy, Samuel Maria. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Sportscast. And let's see what happens in the NBA playoffs. Should be a great series. Peace and love.